Okay. So we're going to start here, Sif Gimel. We already started talking about the aspect of chicken and milk or non-domesticated animals and milk. Now we're going to talk about some of the other aspects that are discussed in Sif Gimel. So let's read over the Shulchan Aruch Sif Gimel inside. Shulchan Aruch says, Einoi noig, the din of basar b'chol does not apply ella, meaning it only applies, but basar behema tahora if you have a kosher animal, b'chol behema tahora and milk from a kosher animal. Ava, however, if you have basar tahora, you have kosher meat, b'chol tameh but non-kosher milk, oy, or basar tameh non-kosher meat, b'chol tahora with kosher milk, then the halacha is mutarim bebishul ubahana. It is permissible with bishul to cook it. It's permissible to cook it, and it's permissible to benefit from it. Now, obviously, you're not allowed to eat it because it's not kosher. It's non-kosher meat or non-kosher milk, whatever the case is, right? It's not kosher because if it comes from a chazer or wherever the animal is, that's not kosher that it's coming from. But it is totally permissible in bishul and hana because it doesn't have any relevance to the isser of basar v'chalav, of milk and meat. Because now we're going to see the reason for, we're going to see like this. Basically, the reason is, the simple understanding of this halacha is that the reason why the din of basar v'chalav doesn't apply here is not because there's already an isser on this, that it's not kosher. That's not the reason. In fact, you will see, we're going to see inside the Pischei Tshuva, that if you have an animal that is kosher, right? Let's say a cow, but it was shechted improperly, so it became a Nevela, okay? Shechted improperly, that is an isser in the Torah. If you were to eat that meat together with milk and you cooked it, basar b'chalav would apply. We do say basar b'chalav will apply. It's not because this circumstance is not kosher that therefore basar b'chalav doesn't apply. It's because the Torah says basar b'chalav only applies to certain animals, right? Which we mentioned in the previous sif. It only applies, the Torah says it only applies to certain animals and those animals are animals that are kosher. Not because, it's something you can't eat. So therefore basar b'chalav doesn't apply. That's not true, as we'll see very soon. Okay. Now, let's read on in the sif, okay? Then we'll read over the din that we learned about chicken and chaya. Basar chaya va'of, if you have chicken and non-domesticated animals, afilu b'chal tahora, even if it's with kosher milk. Mutar b'bishul b'hana, there's no din of basar b'chal there. It's totally permissible in cooking and hana. Ve'af ba'achila, but in terms of the eating of it, eino asar al-midrabanan, it's only rabbinic. It's only a rabbinic prohibition to eat chicken and milk. Okay, chicken and milk is only a rabbinic prohibition. When we have isurim that are only rabbinic, they are only asr, in general speaking, they are only asr in eating. Okay, then we talked about that in previous shiur. Okay, the point I wanted to get to for now is the next point. Avo, dogim v'chagavim, fish and grasshoppers, ein bohem isra afilu m'rabbanan. There is no problem to eat fish and milk together, or grasshoppers and milk together, even rabbinic, there is no isser of basar b'chalav. It is totally not considered meat. You would never even think to confuse the two, and therefore the rabbis never made any din of basar b'chalav by fish and grasshoppers. Now, we are familiar with some kind of a problem with fish and milk that maybe the Sephardim have. And that is because of a separate issue of a sakana, of a danger. There's some kind of, the Gemara talks about that you're not allowed to eat. You are not allowed to eat fish and meat together. The Gemara talks about you're not allowed to eat fish and meat together because there's a sakana. So we're going to see, let's take a look at the Taz. Over here, Taz, Sifkot and Hey. Avol Dogim says the, one second, actually incorrect. It's Taz Sifkot and Gimel. Avol Dogim, the Beis Yosef Kosov, in the Beis Yosef, which is the Shulchan Aruch Sefer on the tour, he writes the following thing. Umiko makom ein lechol dogim b'cholav. A person should not eat fish and milk together, mifnei sakana, because there's a danger. Now, the Gemara never says that. There is no source in the Gemara that fish and milk is a problem. But the Beis Yosef said that this is the case, that it's a problem of sakana. The Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Cairo, said that it's a problem of sakana. He doesn't have a source for that in the Gemara. So all of the Achronim on our page of Shulchan Aruch are going to say, because they've learned Shas, they know it proficiently, they're going to say, it's a mistake. V'hu ta'os Salfer, it's a total mistake. V'tzarach loimer, what you have to correct the mistake and say, im basar, meaning you cannot eat fish with meat. Together with meat, you cannot eat fish. Kimusker ba'Orach Chaim, Siman Kufayin Gimel, like what's mentioned already in Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim. V'chein kasav b'darkei Moshe, and the Ramaz Sefer on the Torah, Darkei Moshe is the Ramaz Sefer on the Torah. In the Ramaz Sefer, he writes, Shenis Arv la Beis Yosef, that the Beis Yosef kind of, I don't want to say confused, or he made a little mistake in his writing, and he mixed up together kan basar b'chalav. The word instead he has fish and milk, but really it should be fish and meat. So it's a mistake. That's what the Darkei Moshe says. So clearly the Ramah does not hold of this concern. The Ramah in the Sefer Darkei Moshe says it's a mistake. Okay? And here we have the Taz is saying very clearly that we do not have any concern of sakana. There is no such a source for this. Ubelavush, and in the Sefer Lavush, Beis Yosef, he brings down the language of the Beis Yosef, which sounds to intimate that he holds like the Beis Yosef, the Eina Nachon, but it is incorrect. So the bottom line is, if someone were to ask you, can I take a bagel, okay, and I can spread cream cheese and eat lox together with it, okay, according to the Beis Yosef, it's a problem. Even though he doesn't really have a source for it, the Beis Yosef seems to say, and he says, I mean, it's not seems, he says it very explicitly, it's a problem. He says it's an issue of a sakana, some kind of a dangerous medical thing. But the problem is, there's no source for that. And the Achrayim here, you have over here the Taz, you have the Ramah, argues and says it's a mistake. Take a look at the Shach Sivkat and Hay. The Shach says, Aval Dagim, Kosav HaTeres Zav. This is a quote from the Lavush. HaTeres Zav is the Lavush's Sefer on Yoredeya. Vizel Shainai. Umikol Makoim, Ein lechol dogim b'cholav. A person should not, even though the halacha says there's no issue of basar b'cholav, even rabbinic, regarding fish and milk, or fish and cheese. However, you shouldn't eat it together. Mifnei sakana, because there is some kind of a danger, medical danger. Kamoishin is bar by Orach Chaim, just like we find in Orach Chaim, Siman Kufayin Gimel Ad Kan L'Shayna. But the problem is, there is no such a thing. Okay, and Lamaisa, the truth is that this HaTeres Zav, this Lavush, is really based off of the Beis Yosef, Shekasav Kain, who writes this. Aval hu tos, it's a mistake. Kiloi nisker sham, it doesn't mention Ella only dogim im basar, fish with meat. Asr mishum sakana. That is a sakana issue. Aval b'chalav, but to eat fish and milk, loy shamanu, we have not heard, v'loy re'inu, we have not seen. V'chol yuma v'yuma, and every single day, nagin and hachi, we this is what we do. We have bagel, cream cheese, and lox. Okay, we're not going to start stopping the Sunday minhag of bagel, cream cheese, and lox. Levashol dog and b'chol, we even cook fish and milk. V'lechol, we eat it. Gam b'darkei Moshe, and also in the Ramaz Sefer on the Torah, Hisek ala Beis Yosef is that he argues on the Beis Yosef, and he clearly comes out that you can do it. Chain b'Sefer Be'er Sheva, Daf Kuf, v'Shar Achrayim, all other Achrayim, B'Sigulav, they argue. The Gam b'Shas, and also in the Gemara, Paraketz at Silent, Psachim, Mashma behedya, it sounds inherent from the Gemara over there, the less be'afilu mishum sakana ayin sham, that there's no issue even of sakana v'hu pashat, it is simple. So we have very clearly that every single achron, except for the Lavush and except for the Shulchan Aruch, holds that fish and cheese, fish and milk is no issue of sakana at all. You person can totally eat them together. Just, it's worth noting to take a look here at the Pischei Tshuva. Where's the Piskei Tshuva? Take a look at the Piskei Tshuva, Sif Tes. Okay, there's a couple of things here in the Piskei Tshuva which are very interesting. It says Ayin Bir Heitiv, which is a quote of the Shach and Taz. But Ayin b'Tshuvas Chinuch Beis Yehuda, the Tshuvas Chinuch Beis Yehuda Siman Samach Aleph Shebekayim Divrei Levush. He actually says no. We paskin, we go like the Levush. The Asr Lecho B'Cholav. You can't eat fish and milk. Mishum dechaker etzel chachmei haroifim, because he researched this question under all the great medical experts of his time. The davka dogim hamituganim im chema muter lechol. Only fish that are fried with butter, okay, that is permissible. Avol dogim hamivushalim b'chalav. But if you take fish and you cook it with milk, apparently the doctors in those days, in his days, said yesh boy sakonas chayli, has some kind of a sickness. The dogam mekarim ma'od, that fish somehow cool down a body a lot. V'gam cholav ra u'mazik l'guf, it's bad for the body. That's what he says, and that's what he brings down. He says, but you can take fish and fry it with butter, which is dairy. You can do that. He says the doctor said isn't a problem, but straight out milk, apparently he spoke to the doctors and he said that they told him it was a problem. Now this is very interesting. The Ayin B'Tshuvas Chasam Salfer Siman Kuf Aleph. Take a look at the Chasam Salfer. The Chasam Salfer says this is not true. It's not true. V'nemon aleinu haRambam Godol haRoifim. And the Rambam is very interesting. The Rambam in Yad HaChazaka, in his Halacha Sefer, the Rambam talks about many different things that are healthy for a person, not healthy for a person. And the Rambam is a trustworthy doctor, and he didn't bring this up as a problem. Say he didn't say that the chema, that the butter is healthy. And so in any case he brings that, fine. Okay. Now look at the bottom of the Piskei Tshuva. This is Lamaisa, what he says. Venerally. So in other words, there were people, clearly, if you take a look in the Poskim, there were people, we already just quoted one, that really held it was a medical issue. They researched it, and they held it was a medical issue. But this is what we rely to get out of that nowadays. Listen to what he says. Venerally, the last line of the Piskei Tshuva. The ha'idna nowadays, nowadays, everybody cooks fish and milk. It's totally normal. It's become already a normal thing. The kivin the dashu barabim, since everybody does it, so sort of our bodies have become accustomed to this, even if there would have been an issue. So it sounds like, everybody says, oh, well, nowadays it's not a problem. So the Shulchan Aruch must be wrong. Of course, if the Shulchan Aruch said it, he, as you can see, big rabbis researched this medically, and they found issues with it. But you're going to tell me nowadays, since everybody has sort of taken it on, it's almost become, our bodies have become immune to this, and therefore, even if there would have been an issue, the Piskei Tshuva says nowadays there is no issue at all because our bodies have become accustomed to it, so therefore it's not a problem. Okay, that is one of the small inyanim here. The real inyan that I want to discuss today is the first thing that the Shulchan Aruch mentioned. The Shulchan Aruch mentioned that there is no din of basar b'chalav by a non-kosher animal, a non-kosher cow, let's say, a non-kosher animal, let's say, and kosher milk, or vice versa. There is no din of basar b'chalav. Obviously, you can't eat it because it's not kosher, but you can cook it and you could benefit from it 100%. So on this, it's very interesting. There is a big debate here in the Shach and Taz about whether or not that is actually the case. So let's start with the Shach over here. The Shach Sif Katan Gimel. Shach says like this. Lashon HaTur. If you look up the Tur, okay, we can look it up. Avol, this is his language. Avol basar tahora. If you have kosher meat, b'chalav behema tamea, with non-kosher milk. Oy, or basar tamea, non-kosher meat, b'chalav tahira, with kosher milk. Ooh, and basar chayav v'oif, and the meat of chicken and non-domesticated animals, afilu b'chol ta'ira, even if you have it in kosher milk, einai ella midrabanan, it's only also midrabanan, mutar b'bishul b'hana. Now, the mashmois, the simple inference from that, the way the Torah writes this, the simple inference from the Torah is that the same din that you have by chicken and milk is also true by non-kosher meat and kosher milk. Because he puts it all sandwiched together in one category, and he doesn't split up the categories like we have beautifully here in the Shulchan Aruch. He sandwiches them all together, and he says on all of them that it is only asur midrabanan. So it sounds like from the Torah that non-kosher milk and kosher meat, or vice versa, has a din of basar v'chol of midrabanan from rabbinically. That's what it sounds like. And that's going to pose a very, very big problem. And we'll see why. The Kosav HaBeis Yosef. The Beis Yosef writes, this language that the Torah does, he sandwiches it all together, it's not proper. The Mashikosav Eino Yel Midrabanan, that which the Torah says it's only Midrabanan, Loi Motzi Koi can only be going. Ela L'chai V'of, only on non-domesticated animals and chickens. B'chol of Tahara with kosher meat. De'ila Basar Tahara B'chol Tamea Ay. Ipcha, because if it's going on non-kosher milk and kosher meat or vice versa, Loi Ashkechan, we do not find She'asruah Chachamim Ba'achila Mishum Basar B'chol. We do not find any source, seemingly, it sounds like, we do not find any source that the rabbis forbade non-kosher meat with kosher milk, that the rabbis made any rabbinic prohibition of basar b'chol. We do not find such a source anywhere in the Gemara. Vegam, not only do we not find a source for it, so it sounds like the Torah is making it up, Loi haya inyan lo isra midirim. There's no reason to create an isra d'Rabbanan of basar b'chol. There is no reason to do so. Achar shekfarhu asr v'oimed min ha-Torah. It's already asr. It's already asr because it's not kosher. So what are you going to tell me? The rabbi should come along and make a prohibition of basar b'chol because we're worried. There's no reason to make a rabbinic prohibition because no one's going to touch this stuff. It's not kosher. Right? It's already asr min ha-Torah mishum basar tameh because of non-kosher meat, oichol of tameh or non-kosher milk. Ad kan lashon lekachtik and kan halashon v'yafe kiven. So therefore, the Shulchan Aruch said, I totally, very much strongly disagree with how the Torah wrote his Sefer. The Torah, remember, is a halachic Sefer, just like the Shulchan Aruch, in which he codified all the law. And every way he writes it has massive differences and creates massive nafkaminas la'alacha. So clearly the Torah wrote it in a way to tell us that it is by non-kosher meat and kosher milk that it should be asur basar b'chol d'Rabbanan. But says the Shulchan Aruch, that's wrong for two reasons. First of all, we have no source for that. Second of all, it makes no sense to even create the isser because it's not necessary. It won't accomplish anything. So therefore, he changes the lashon in his Shulchan Aruch beautifully to reflect that issue that he had on the Torah. Okay. However, says the Shach, Ela shehabach hisig alav, but the Bach is a sefer also on the Torah. And the Bach says, no, it's not true what you're saying, Beis Yosef. I disagree. He says, Upirish da Torah asalash mi'inon. The Torah is coming to teach us. Demikol makom midrabanan asur mishum basar b'chol. Says the Bach, I disagree. There is a rabbinic issue here by non-kosher meat and kosher milk. There's a problem. And it's a problem of basar b'chol midrabanan. Now, you have your questions? Okay, we'll resolve them. Says the Shach, says the Bach. The Bach says, V'nafkamina, and I'll give you a reason. I'll give you an area where it will make a difference. You'll tell me that it makes no difference. You're going to tell me that it makes no difference to create this Isser D'Rabbanan. I'll tell you it makes a massive difference. Le'inyan chaticha nasis nevela. Now, to understand this Bach, we need to give a little bit of an introduction to one of the massive concepts in Basar b'chol, one of the major Simanim we're going to learn later on in Siman Tzadi Beis. There's a concept called chaticha nasis nevela. And let me explain to you what this concept is. If you have a piece of meat, okay, piece of kosher meat, and a piece of treif meat, treif something, falls onto that piece of kosher meat. The halacha is, in order to be mavatal, that treif piece of stuff, you need to have 60 in the kosher piece of meat against what is coming against it. Okay? Now, what if you don't have 60? What if you don't have 60? If you don't have 60, that kosher piece of meat becomes permeated with non-kosher stuff and now is not allowed to be edible. Now, you can't eat it. It's permeated with treif. Now, how do you view that? So how do you view that? In other words, to say, if this piece of kosher meat that became permeated with Isser now falls into a totally another kosher dish, what would you need 60 against? Do you need 60 against that entire piece of meat? No. You only need 60 against what permeated, the amount of Isser that went into the piece of meat. Now, it happens to be that piece of meat can't be mavatal the Isser because it doesn't have 60. But you would only need 60 against the ratio of whatever Isser is inside of that piece of meat. That is the regular way things work in all Isurim in the Torah. Normal, very simple fractions, simple mathematical equation. Okay, whatever permeates the kosher piece of meat is what you would need to be mavatal in the next mixture that it falls into. Very simple. By Basar v'chalav, we are going to introduce a very new concept, and it's a fascinating concept. By Basar v'chalav, there's a concept called chanan. Chaticha nasis nevela. The piece of meat itself becomes an isser. So let's explain to that. You have a piece of meat. Okay, you have a regular kosher piece of meat. And now milk, hot milk, whatever, it's hot, it's cooking, comes onto that piece of meat. And in that piece of meat, you did not have 60 against it. What happens to that piece of meat? Is it just permeated with a little bit of milk? No. It becomes a whole new entity, one big entity called Basar v'chalav. The entire entity is completely, intrinsically Asr, called Basar v'chalav. Totally Asr. If it would fall into another dish, you would need 60 against the entire entity. That is the concept of chaticha nases nevela. This piece of meat becomes itself a nevela. Not it's permeated with nevela. It is nevela. That is the concept of chana. Okay? So now, says the Bach, if we say that this case of non-kosher meat and kosher milk, if it becomes basar b'chalav rabbinically, then it will make a difference. See, if they're both together, so whatever the kosher side is, you only need 60 against what permeated that kosher piece from not kosher. But if it becomes basar b'chalav, you need 60 against the whole entire thing, the whole entire mixture, the non-kosher meat and the kosher meat, all of it together, you need 60 against it. If you say it has a din of basar b'chalav, because basar b'chalav has the principle of chanan, that the entire piece, the entire thing, the entire togetherness becomes one object of Isser. So says the Bach like this. Says the Bach, Lamaisa, there is a massive distinction by saying something has a din of basar b'chalav versus it doesn't. And therefore, we can say that this does have a din of basar b'chalav, this non-kosher meat and kosher milk. And what will be a practical distinction? A practical distinction will be regarding chanan. De'ena yella, so v'naf gamina, let's read it inside. V'naf gamina lenyan chaticha nasas nevela. The distinction will be regarding the principle of chaticha nasas nevela, the svira lay that we're going to say later on. De'ena yella b'basar b'chalav is only by basar b'chalav. So we have a difference. We have a practical difference of putting on this piece of piece of non-kosher meat and kosher milk, the din of basar b'chalav. We have a practical difference that will create. Now he doesn't answer the questions of the Beis Yosef, Or the Beis Yosef's question was there's no source. The Beis Yosef's question is there's no purpose. He just says, I'll give you a practical difference, and therefore I would say that it has a din of Basar B'chal D'Rabbanan. V'chein, says the Bach further, Le'inyan Chaticha Haruya Le'Ischabed. He says it will also make a difference for a principle of Chaticha Haruya Le'Ischabed, which is also a very big principle in Isser V'Heter. And it's, again, we're just going to surface level touch on these principles. These principles each have simanim upon simanim that really go into them and really get to the meat and potatoes of them. But just for now, just to understand what the Bach says, to understand his point of view, Chaticha Haru'i L'Schabed is the following thing. There's a concept that if you have a piece of Isser, okay, a piece of something that's not kosher, and it is a chashiv, a very significant, special piece of meat, piece of item, that it would be something honorable to serve. The din is even in 1,000, it's not batal. It's a rabbinic prohibition that when something's chashiv, we cannot nullify it. When it's something that's significant, it's not nullifiable. Okay. Now the din is that principle only applies, again, similar concept. It does not apply to isurim to absorptions. In other words, if I take a piece of isser and it now absorbs into a heter piece, that heter piece is not the absorptions of isser in it are not considered chashiv. Okay, only an actual piece of meat itself that's not kosher, that's chashiv, is considered something chashiv. Okay, so he says that again, considering this piece of this non-kosher meat and kosher milk as a din of basar v'chalav has ramifications for also the principle of something chashiv never being batal in 1,000. Why does it have that ramification? Because if the whole thing becomes an intrinsic, again, it's based off of the principle of Kana. If the whole thing becomes an intrinsic isser, so now it's not an absorption of isser, it is usser. That kosher piece of meat, or not kosher piece of meat, became a piece of isser. So that's what he wants to. So it extends to that principle as well. Fine. The Chaim Pirish Aprisha, and the Prisha explains the same thing. Okay. Ulafizeh, afilu l'didan, even according to us, the Kaimalan Chanan b'chol yisurim, haya nafkusa b'davar l'inyan mashkasa v'rav ba'agosim and tzadi beis siftal. Okay. The point is that if you learn all the laws of basar v'chalav, it comes out that giving something a din of basar v'chalav versus it just being usher because it's non-kosher, it has a non-kosher element, makes serious nafkaminas l'halacha. Okay. So that is the Bach. You have, again, the Tur puts it all together. The Beis Yosef says, I don't understand why you're putting this all together. There's no source for it. It doesn't make sense to give it a din of basar v'chalav. The Bach says, I could give you a nafkamina. I could give you a halachic difference it will make by making it asur midrabanan. And therefore, I think it should be, I agree with the Tur. Now, says the Shach, L'fi ani is daiti. It's not true at all. We don't find, like the Beis Yosef said, we don't find any source. We don't find any of the Paiskim that write this. From Rashi on the Gemara and the Ran Mashmala Hedya, it sounds clear from them. The lesbehu isr mishum basar v'chalav klal. There's no issue of basar v'chalav at all. I feel that Rabbanan even rabbinic. V'gam ein tam klal. There's no reason shechachamim yasru that the chacham should give it an isr mishum basar v'chalav. There's no reason why. The bishleima. There's a very important right here. The Shach gives you a very good, clear understanding of a lot of things that we've been learning over the last couple Shuir. The bishleima basarayif. I understand why the rabbis came along by chicken and milk and created an isser. Shayach, Shapir, Gezer. I understand why the rabbis came along. Because if you go and eat chicken and milk, people will come to eat meat and chicken. Because meat and milk. Because people think that chicken and meat are not so far off. Okay, because of a Rambam, like the Rambam says. But what's the reason that the rabbis have to come in here Shebasar behema tahira b'chalav tamei. Let's say you have kosher meat and non-kosher milk. Or the opposite. Why should the rabbis come along? Yasser mishum basar b'chalav. Why do the rabbis need to do this? What's the issue? That you're going to come, if you eat this, you're going to come to eat something else? You can't eat this. Without this, there's no concern. Because it's anyways not kosher. So you're not going to eat this. So there's no reason to say, oh, well, if you eat this, you might come to eat that. You're not eating this to begin with. So the rabbis don't need to come in here at all. Says the Shach, I don't see any reason logically why you should have a din of basar b'chalav rabbinically over here. It makes no sense. And I think what I'm saying now is literally the intention of the Beis Yosef. The Masha Kosav, in the words he writes, the gam loy haya inyan la'asrei. There was no purpose to aser. Okay, that's what the Beis Yosef is asking. He's asking what the Shach saying. I'm not coming here to say a chiddush. I'm just explaining to you what the Beis Yosef is saying. Not the way the Bach understood the Beis Yosef. See, the Bach heard the Beis Yosef's questions, and therefore he said, okay, I can give you an nafkamina, I can give you a halachic distinction. He says, well, no, that's not. The Bach misunderstood the Beis Yosef's question. Not like the Bach understood the hakfar asr b'achila min haTorah. See, the Bach understood the Beis Yosef was saying, there's no actual difference if it's already asr min haTorah. There's no added element. You're not changing anything. If the rabbis come along and make it asr, you are not changing anything. You are not creating anything new than what already exists. And therefore, says the Bach, well, I could give you some halachic distinctions. I could give you some reasons why you are creating something new. That's not the pshat. That's exactly what the Beis Yosef, that's what the Shach saying. That's not the understanding of the Beis Yosef. The loikim Moshe b'lashon Bach, not like the way the Bach understood it. The hakfar aser b'achila min haTorah. V'lo hutzrucha ligzur alav. There was no need because you're not accomplishing anything. The haven, and he understood Beis Yosef b'alayim. The Beis Yosef's coming to say the ein afkamina b'davar, that there's no actual distinction. There's nothing added here. Imhu aser b'shum basar b'chalav oila kivin shkvar aser min haTorah. He says since it's already aser min haTorah, you're not adding anything. And therefore he answered, the nafkamina, there is a nafkamina. No, says the Shach, the Beis Yosef was saying how I explained it. And that's the halacha l'maisa. So the Shach is paskening, there's no issue at all of basar b'chalav by non-kosher meat or kosher milk with the vice versa. There is no relevance to basar b'chalav, nothing. You're right, you can't eat it because it's not kosher. But there's no relevance to basar b'chalav. Okay. V'chein ikar ladina, that's the halacha. B'shagam, and also he says, he throws into the equation, shechaticha ri l'schabit gufei havi midrabanan. First of all, anyways, the whole concept of something that is chashiv is not batal even in 1,000 is also midrabanan. So it wouldn't be logical to say that we're giving it a din of basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan for a distinction that is only also midrabanan. It's just too far-fetched. That's another thing he throws in. Ukidul kaman siman kuf yud, like we find later on. Gama drisha, also the drisha. Kasav b'soif dvar writes in the end of his words, Elashadayin kasha. He says, I don't understand the Torah. Shalom etzinu zeh b'shum makom. We don't find this anywhere. Shebasar tahira b'chalav t'mei yibcha. The non-kosher milk kosher meat and non-kosher milk, or the opposite, yesh by isra rabbanan. There's no such a source for this. The Shanas is Nevela Rabbanan, that should become Nevela, should become one entity of Isra Rabbanan. There's no such a source for this. So the Shach argues on it. There is a very big Taz on this as well. I don't know if I'm going to go through the whole Taz inside in this year, but I will just show you in the Taz this part so you can see very clearly that he totally is in line with the Shach on this. It is Taz Beis. If we skip down to the Taz, very simple. He goes on, he makes a lot of similar points to the Shach. And at the end of his words, I have it over here, Umilvad kol masha zacharnu. And besides everything that we mentioned, ein makom loymar, there's no place to say, Sherabanan gazru sheyehei isra achilas basar b'chalav b'minach hatam. He says there's no reason to say that the rabbis created an Isser Basar B'chalav by one of the species being Tameh. We don't find this in the Talmud. We don't find this in the Paiskim. Only by chicken. Yesh plukta, there's a machlokas. And we came out with our determination. In the Mishnah teaches, if you have kosher milk with a non-kosher meat, says the Mishnah in Chulin, it is mutter to cook and to benefit. Upirish Rashi, and Rashi explains, avlachila, but eating it, lohisker, the mutter. Doesn't mention that that's permissible. Why? Given the yesh iser mach mastuma, because it's not kosher. Says Rashi, doesn't say there's an iser to eat. It doesn't say there's a heter to eat it. Why? Because it's not kosher. Now Rashi doesn't say because you know why you're not allowed to eat it? Because of basar b'chal of derabanan. He doesn't say that. So it's pretty obvious. Shmamina the belav tuma sounds like from Rashi that without the issue of it being not kosher, ain't shum shaychus there's no other issue. Dim like how you let them last season last year. The Mishnah should have mentioned it. If you have one species non-kosher, have a kashar isurim mamish. It's like all other isurim. What the Torah writes. So says the Taz. Taz says, I'm so convinced that it is a mistake, okay, to think that non-kosher meat or vice versa and kosher milk has anything to do with basar b'chal. It's such a mistake that I will even change the girsa in the Torah. The Torah sounded like he created such a possibility to say this. You have to change the lashon of the Torah because it must be a mistake. The mashakazim Torah she'ein al mirabanan loy kai, it can only be going raka basar ayif v'loy kol basar tamei ay chol tamei ima. He's not including non-kosher meat or non-kosher milk with it. Rak le'inyan, the only thing that it has relevance in the same sentences, she'ein mutter b'hana u'b'bishul, that it happens to be mutter in benefit and cooking, but there's no other connection. Kamashkos b'yis like the basic writes. Mishmachi Yafa also b'Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch did a very nice job here. Shaloi hitikzeh. He did not do it in the way the Torah wrote it. He very clearly corrected the mistake. My father-in-law, by the way, the Taz's father-in-law was the Bach. He says, my father writes de'ena nachai. My Rechamizal cause of de'ena nachai, and my father writes that this is not correct. The li nira shadin imay bebirur. And I say that the halacha is like him completely. So in other words, the Bach wrote that it is incorrect what the Beis Yosef says, but I argue with my father-in-law. Okay, this is not, there's earlier sources for arguing with your father-in-law. It's not it's not only in our generation. It happened with big great rabbis as well. He disagrees. The Marshal actually literally changed around the words. He didn't say, oh, that's what he's going at. No, he actually took the words and changed it around. So very nice. Asi Shaper will come out very nice. Then it will come out. He changed the gear so that all the commonality here is regarding the permissibility to do bishul, to cook it, and to hana. So what does it come out of here? Let's just get it very clear because this was a little bit of a complicated story. You have non-kosher meat, okay? Meat that comes from a non-kosher animal, together with kosher milk or vice versa. The halacha is, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're obviously not allowed to eat it. But if you were to cook it together, it's totally permissible. You want to benefit from it, you want to sell it, no problem. That's the Shulchan Aruch. The Shach and Taz agree with the Shulchan Aruch. The Torah, it's not very clear. Okay, the Bach actually goes along and says that there is a rabbinic basar b'chal issue, that the practical difference that will make is not regarding bishul and hana. Bishul and hana would totally be permissible. The practical difference that would make is regarding concepts we'll see later in Siman Tzadi Beis, legabe chanan chaticha nasis nevela. Now, before we finish off here, there is something very interesting. There is a Pischei Tshuva where he brings the following case, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about before. What about, we're talking about a non-kosher animal, right? A chazer, let's say. What about if you have a kosher animal that was shechted improperly, nevela? Says the Pischei Tshuva Sif Katan Vav. Ayin b'daglu mervava. Daglu mervava is a sefer from Rav Yecheskel Landau, the Noda b'Yehuda. He says, "Shekasav ubasar nevela." If you have meat that was not shechted properly, okay. So in other words, it comes from a cow, just was shechted improperly, which is what you would say is like the typical meat in most non-kosher restaurants. It's from a cow, just not shechted properly. V'chein cholav asur levashel. You cannot cook it together. B'cholav. You cannot cook nevela together with milk. Same thing also, he brings also chalev, chein chalev, not fat. Fat meaning there's certain fats from animals, from kosher animals that are not kosher. If you take that chalev, that fat, and you put it together with milk, that also you cannot cook it. It's asur min ha-Torah. And veloike al bashulei. It's a isser dairaisa of basar b'chalav to cook it. Okay, aval ba'achila, but to eat it, ein boy isser basar b'chalav. There's no isser basar b'chalav, and I'm going to explain to you why. There is no issue here of achila. Why? It's nevela. You can't eat it anyways. There's a klal that we don't have isurim falling. When you have one isser, you can't have another isser fall on top of it. It's called ein isser chalal isser. You can't have one isser and then another isser fall on top of it. So the isser of eating this is nevela already. There's no basar b'chalav can't come onto the achila part of it. However, what has not been asered is bishul and anah. You're allowed to cook a non-shechted properly meat. You're allowed to cook it, right? You're allowed to go cook it. Comes along basar b'chalav and drops on that, because basar b'chalav you're not allowed to cook. Basar b'chalav you're not allowed to benefit from. So basar b'chalav can fall on the cooking and the benefiting side of it. So very importantly, the halacha is by meat that comes from an animal that wasn't shechted properly, has a din of basar b'chalav dairaisa regarding cooking it and regarding benefiting from it. Now, there is a big debate, if we go on in the Piskei Tshuva, about benefiting. And this is where a big shaila about McDonald's, right? Because McDonald's, they don't have anything that's shechted properly. Okay, nothing is shechted. Everything with any meat there is going to be coming from a non-shechted properly animal. And so clearly here, from the first part we just saw, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. You're not allowed to have any hana from it. You can't sell it. Okay? Can't sell it. If it's together with milk, you can't sell it. However, there's a debate here in the Paiskim, and I want to just read parts of it for you so you can understand here. He says, Va'amnam, second line, Imu asur b'hana ain't a mevur sham. You're not allowed to cook it. That's for sure in the Dagul Mervava. The Dagul Mervava says it's mevur from the Rambam, from Maimonides. So it's very clear you're not allowed to cook it. But what about benefiting from it? Benefiting from it is a whole debate here. And he says from the Rambam, it's clear that it actually is not forbidden in benefit. Rambam in another source, in his Pirush HaMishnayos, it's actually not a problem. He says, however, it's not so pashut. There are Rishonim that argue. And if he ends off over here and he says, if you're going to have a great loss, lo yafsid. So if somebody wanted to benefit from non-shechted properly animals, a nevela, together with milk, if it's going to be a great loss, you can be soymech and get benefit. If it's going to be a great loss. What a great loss is, we'll talk about another shiur.